And now we're moving on straight into the discussion segment where we actually look at, I mentioned that we'll be looking at Juneteenth, we'll also be looking at Kenneth David Kaunda, who happens to be the first president of Zambia. Unfortunately, he actually has passed away. Well, let's start with Kenneth David Kaunda, and unfortunately, he passed away 17th June, that was yesterday. He was born on the 28th of April, 1924. Now, he happened to be the first president of Zambia from 1964 to 1991. He was popularly known as KK, that's what some people they choose to call him. And he happened to be at the forefront of the struggle for independence for Zambia from British rule. So he was actually not satisfied with Harry Nkubula's leadership of the Northern Rhodesian African National Congress. So he broke away and then he founded the Zambian African National Congress, which later became the head of the United National Independence Party, what some people call the UNIP. Now, he was also the first president, like I mentioned, the first president of the independent Zambia. And in 1973, following tribal and inter-party violence, all political parties except the UNIP were banned through an amendment of the constitution after the signing of the Coma Declaration. Well, that's the man we're looking at today. I have my co-host in the studio with me, Maud and Hafiz. Welcome.
Thank you.
Maud. Okay. Hafiz,
Yeah,
you look disturbed.
very.
What's wrong?
I'll talk to you about it off air.
I hear you. Kenneth Kaunda, he's going to join the other leaders that have already departed.
Well, sad development. I think a day or two before this incident, we picked up reports that he was hospitalized, and we were hoping that he would pull through. But sadly, we've lost him to the cold hands of death, and quite an unfortunate incident there. But well, uh, we can only say, may his soul rest in perfect peace. Now, not long ago, in a similar manner, we sat here on this platform and talked about Tanzania's John Magufuli in such glowing terms when he also passed on.
Yeah.
Yes, highlighting some of the things he did. Very interesting man. Yes. So,
COVID-19's best friend.
oh, come on.
I mean, we all know.
Yes, you know. I don't know. So anyway, but
This is where Maud gives you the look and goes like, really?
we spoke about him in such glowing terms, and it's only proper we do something similar for a gentle statesman like His Excellency Kenneth David Kaunda, also known as KK, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. Now, I'm not going to go into history. I mean, it's out there. It's something that is readily accessible in terms of what he did and what he represented. But so I'm only just going to touch on certain highlights of, his legacy and what he stood for. Now, if you take a look at the history of Zambia and as a country, now this was a man that, like you rightly mentioned, I mean, he opposed white minority rule, and that was all it was. When you look at Zambia and the way it stood at the time, you take a look at South Africa, there was the apartheid government. You take a look at now Namibia, which was Southwest Africa. Then that was the situation there. You take a look at what was called Rhodesia then, which is now Zimbabwe. That was the situation then. So this was a man that positioned Zambia as some, like a buffer zone, for black nationalism, where, you could speak your mind and everything. So as a safe haven for black nationalists, so they could come in and go. And he even went on to impose sanctions on Rhodesia, even though it affected Zambia more. Because if you take a look at the African map and watch how Zambia is positioned, it's one of the 16 landlocked African countries.
Yeah.
Yes, and so which means they have to depend on the coastal countries for some of their imports. And you're looking at the likes of, I think, Angola, Mozambique, and Tanzania. These are places he would have to, wait on. But especially because of the frosty relationship he had with Rhodesia, then there were issues. So he had to team up with Julius Nyerere to come up with certain, to come up with, a certain situation or a certain alternative to be able to access goods for his people. Now, if you also watch his life closely, you realize that there are, there are certain things he did, and you realize that he clearly picked a leaf from the books of the likes of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, in terms of employing civil disobedience tactics
Mm-hmm.
and trying to gain the attention of colonial rulers. Then he introduced what his civil disobedience campaign became known as Cha Cha Cha, where they employed it to to maximum use. And dare I say, to some extent, he had certain similarities with our own Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and the way he handled things and even the way his life went about. Talk about Kwame Nkrumah, you can say that he moved from the UGCC
Mm-hmm.
and formed the
Some
CPP.
governance
Yes,
now.
exactly. Now he moved from the ANC and from the ZANC, which eventually metamorphosed into the UNIP,
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned. Now, also the thing about Kenneth Kaunda is that, I mean, he ruled the country for 27 years, and 18 of those years, I mean, it was under one party state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of critics will blame him, but then, if you look at the situation in Zambia at the time, you realize that it was something he had to do. That was the situation they found themselves. It was something he had to do. Talk about Kwame Nkrumah, and of course, his critics will often make reference to the PDA, and I'm not talking about public displays of affection. I'm talking about Preventive Detention Act, which he introduced that essentially gave him the powers to imprison mostly political opponents without
Yeah.
trial.
Yeah.
Yes, but in the case of Kenneth Kaunda, what probably gave him, got his critics, eating their words, was the fact that later, I think, in 1991, where he supervised elections and even lost and handed over gracefully. I mean, that was a huge turning point in the history of Zambia there. But all in all, we can only say goodbye to such a noble statesman.
Very true. Miss Maud.
Hi.
She's actually even in black, a black dress. So, are you mourning with Zambia?
I didn't know he had passed until Hafiz mentioned it this morning. Yesterday I got to the house and I didn't have light.
You need to start using solar.
Or change her location.
Okay, that's also true. Yeah, it's either you change your location
I
or
thought
use
we were,
solar.
I thought we were giving suggestions.
Yeah, that could
Okay,
make your
so-
life feel better, improved.
So I should buy solar, which is very expensive, or I should relocate, which is also very expensive. How much are you guys contributing to either of your ideas?
Hafiz is willing to accommodate you for some time.
Hafiz, are you?
I'm homeless.
Yeah, let's just move on to Kenneth. I forgot it was Hafiz we're talking about. Are you seriously still laughing, right?
I didn't expect that. Yeah, but I think Zambia has lost a great man. See, if you want to follow Hafiz, we will leave here today. I believe Zambia has lost a great man. I mean, reading on him, one thing that stood out for me that I remember is he gave a eulogy at the funeral of Nelson Mandela when he passed, and then apparently he exceeded his time, the time limit that was given to him, right? So the people, let's say the organizers, tried to cut him, and then he said, I'm trying to actually read what he said. This is what he said. He said the organizers were trying to control an old man who fought the Boers. So it's like, thinking back, it's like you look at all of these great African leaders that passed, and there's this percentage of humor that they all had that stands out, because looking at the things that they did and the things that they've been through and the things that they've led their nations to go through in attaining independence, you think people who have seen struggles like that wouldn't have a sense of humor.
That's true.
But you look at all of these great men and then you see certain videos where they are cracking jokes, where they are saying things and the crowd is laughing, and you're like, well, these are men who, despite of everything they have seen and despite everything that they have been through, still have a sense of humor. And I would just like to say condolences, and I would like to look at some of the things that he did. So, to improve the education levels in his country, Kenneth Kaunda implemented a policy that provided children with free school supplies such as pens, pencils, and then exercise books. Children were given these supplies regardless of their parents' financial situation.
I think it was one of the most important things because his educational policies were great. Looking at the fact that Zambia then was one of the when in terms of education, it was poorly developed because of the British. You know how the British handled it, and in the whole of the nation, then they actually had just 109 university graduates, and 0.5 of the percent actually had completed primary education. So they invested most in their education. I think it was a great thing that he put his hands to.
Yes, especially the hassle and bustle that parents go through when a new
Reopens,
fresh
yes.
term is starting,
Yeah.
and they have to buy books and textbooks and exercise books and pens and all of that. So imagining your child going to school at the beginning of a new year,
And then they didn't
and
have all
and
that.
they don't have to buy any books. I think all you have to do is just
They
pay
pay the
fees,
school fees and then the uniforms.
and then
And then make sure they attend the school. Make sure they attend the school. That's also super important.
And another thing he also did was in 1968, he introduced the Mologunshi reforms, in which he planned to acquire major shares in foreign-owned firms in order to boost the economy. He managed to acquire shares in the Anglo-American Corporation and the Rhodesia Selection Trust and consolidated the two companies and then called the new company Inchanga Consolidated Copper Mines. And after his retirement from politics, he worked towards fighting HIV/AIDS.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big thing too.
That's actually a big thing because HIV/AIDS, we don't know where it came from. There's no cure for it.
Are people still looking for where it came from?
Shouldn't we?
Well, I mean, people looking for where it came from, they haven't found it. I think they should start
I
looking
mean,
towards
there
the
are
cure.
conspiracy theories. I even have a video on my phone.
Okay. Hafiz.
Yeah, still on Kenneth or HIV. um, moving on to Kenneth, I think for Kenneth, yes, he wasn't perfect. Yes, he had his faults. Yes, and but here at Africa Global, we are interested in the positives. But of course, I mean, a lot of people will point to the fact that in terms of economics, you realize that Zambia suffered for some time with the way he handled the issue with Rhodesia and the copper situation. Given that copper was or still is the chief export commodity of Zambia, so.
Yeah.
Because of the way it was treated. And besides, on the world market, I think the prices of copper plummeted around the 70s. So it greatly affected, the country
Economy, yeah.
economically. And I think they've struggled to recover since then. But they are still trying. And I think later on this year, I think somewhere August, they will be holding an election. Yes. And so for now, I think they've decided to suspend all campaign activities to remember such a great man, and hopefully they'll be holding a peaceful election come
This
August.
August, yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you guys so much. So that's all we'll do for the memory of Kenneth David Kaunda of Zambia. Once again, our condolences going to the whole nation of Zambia, and we stand in solidarity with you guys. We just hope that things will be carried on smoothly, and it wouldn't lead to anything.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe, and share.